Imagine a world teetering on the edge, a world of melting ice and rising seas, of forests ablaze and skies choked with smoke. Now picture two voices rising from the chaos, as different as fire and water, yet singing the same desperate hymn for its salvation. One is a girl, barely old enough to vote, her braids swinging defiantly as she stands alone before the Swedish parliament, a handmade sign clutched in her hands. School strike for climate. The other is an old man, his saffron robes a quiet rebellion against a fractured century, his laughter echoing from a Himalayan exile as he whispers truths the world has forgotten. Greta Thunberg and the Dalai Lama. Oh, what a pair they make. A teenager from Stockholm and a monk from Tibet, separated by oceans, decades, and destinies, yet somehow bound together in a dance of purpose that stirs the soul. How can it be that two beings so unalike could weave their threads into the same tapestry of meaning? How extraordinary that their paths, though never crossing in the dust of this earth, seem to meet in the vastness of ideas, in the trembling hope for a future we may not live to see. Let's begin with Greta, shall we? A child of the 21st century, born in 2003 when the world was already groaning under the weight of its own excess. She was 15, when she sat down outside that cold, imposing Parliament building in 2018, her eyes blazing with a fury that belied her years. Can you picture it? A lone figure, small against the stone, her sign a cry to the heavens. Why should I study for a future that's being stolen? Oh, the audacity of it. The sheer, breathtaking courage. She didn't just sit there for a day, no, she sparked a wildfire. Fridays for Future, they called it. A movement that swept across continents, children pouring into streets from Berlin to Bogota, their voices a chorus of rage and resolve. You have failed us, she thundered at the United Nations in 2019, her words a blade cutting through the apathy of the powerful. And the world listened. How could it not? Time magazine named her Person of the Year that same year, a crown for a girl who'd rather wield a megaphone than wear a tiara. By 2020, her shadow loomed large, a moral force draped in the plain clothes of a schoolgirl, her influence spilling beyond borders into something almost, dare I say it, spiritual. And then there's the Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, the 14th of his line, a man who seems to carry the weight of centuries in his gentle smile. Born in 1935 in a village so remote it might as well have been a whisper on the wind, he was plucked from obscurity at 2 years old, declared a reincarnation of compassion itself. Can you fathom that? A toddler, chosen to lead a people through exile, war, and the slow bleed of a culture under siege. He fled Tibet in 1959, a young man then, his homeland swallowed by forces he couldn't fight with fists, only with faith. From India, he built a life of teaching, peace, kindness, the interconnectedness of all things. His words are soft, but oh, how they pierce. The planet does not need more successful people, he once said, but more peacemakers, healers, restorers. And in 2020, as the world reeled from pandemics and protests, he penned Our Only Home, a climate appeal to the world, a book that's less a tome and more a prayer. In it, he turned his gaze to Greta, to the youth shaking the earth, awake, and wrote an open letter that feels like a grandfather's blessing. You are giving us hope. Isn't that beautiful? A monk in his 80s, reaching across the abyss to a girl in her teens, their hearts beating to the same urgent rhythm. But here's where the story twists, where the thread frays just a little. The claim, Greta Thunberg, listed among spiritually influential people alongside the Dalai Lama in 2020, stops me in my tracks. Did such a list ever grace the pages of history? I've wandered through the archives, sifted through the dust of 2020's headlines, and found no parchment, no proclamation that binds them so neatly. No Time magazine spread, no Forbes ranking, no spiritual council etching their names side by side. What then is this? A mirage? A poetic leap? Oh, how I long for it to be true, for some scribe to have seen what I see, their spirits entwined in a shared crusade. Perhaps it's not a list at all, but a feeling, a murmur in the collective soul. Greta's voice, raw and unyielding, carried a moral weight in 2020 that felt sacred, didn't it? Her call to save the planet wasn't just science. It was a plea for justice, for the unborn, for the voiceless creatures drowning in our greed. And the Dalai Lama, with his book, his praise, his lifelong chant of compassion, doesn't that weave a spiritual thread too? The world is full of magic things, patiently waiting for our senses to grow sharper, W.B. Yeats once wrote. Maybe this is the magic, a convergence we intuit, even if no paper proves it. And what of their meeting, or lack thereof? A direct meeting has not been confirmed, the statement says, and in 2020, it's true. No photograph exists of Greta stepping onto Indian soil, no record of her sitting cross-legged before the Dalai Lama's serene gaze. She, who refuses to fly, tethered to her vow to spare the skies more carbon. He, bound by exile, a prisoner of politics in a world that's forgotten how to listen. How cruel the irony. Two souls so aligned, kept apart by the very planet they seek to heal. Yet wait, oh wait, for the universe has its ways. January 2021 brought them together, not in flesh but in spirit, through a screen that spanned continents. The Mind and Life Institute summoned them for a virtual gathering, a conversation on the crisis of climate feedback loops, and there they were. Greta, fierce and focused, the Dalai Lama, warm and wise, joined by scientists in a dialogue that felt like a prayer. Did you see it? His eyes twinkled as he spoke of her courage. She nodded, perhaps awed by his calm. Was that not a meeting? A collision of essences, unbound by the petty limits of space? We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience, Teilhard de Chardin mused. Tell me, does a screen diminish the soul's reach? I say no. Their words met, their dreams kissed, and in that moment, the world held its breath. Now, let's step into the deeper waters, the currents of philosophy that swirl beneath these facts. What are Greta and the Dalai Lama if not mirrors of our own fractured humanity? She, a child of the Anthropocene, born into a world we've scarred with our hands, stands as both accuser and savior. How dare you, she cried at the UN, her voice a thunderclap of truth. How dare we, indeed? How dare we plunder and pillage, leaving her generation to sift through the ashes? She's no saint, no mystic. She's flesh and fury, a girl who sees the clock ticking and refuses to let it wind down in silence. And the Dalai Lama, he's the balm to her burn, isn't he? A man who's seen empires fall, who's tasted loss, yet chooses joy over bitterness. My religion is very simple. My religion is kindness, he says, and oh, how those words shimmer. Together, they're a paradox. Rage and peace, youth and age, a scream and a sigh, united in a single question. What will we make of this life? I can't shake the wonder of it. How does a teenager's defiance harmonize with a monk's serenity? How do they both, in their own ways, call us to the same altar, of accountability, of care, of a love that stretches beyond the self? Greta demands we act, tearing through our excuses with the ferocity of a storm. The Dalai Lama beckons us to feel, to see the earth not as a resource but as a mother, a living thing cradling us all. Isn't this the dance of existence itself? The push and pull, the fire and the stillness? The meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away, Pablo Picasso declared. Greta gives her voice, raw and relentless. The Dalai Lama gives his vision, gentle and vast. And what of us? What are we giving, I wonder, as the glaciers weep and the forests fade? Are we spectators or stewards? Sleepwalkers or sentinels? Let me linger here, in the heart of it all, and confess something. I want that 2020 list to be real. Oh, how I want it. A scroll unfurled, their names side by side, a testament to their shared light. But even without it, can't you feel their influence? Greta shakes us awake, a jolt to the spine of a world, grown numb. The Dalai Lama steadies us, a hand on the shoulder when the shaking threatens to break us. Together, they're a symphony, discordant notes resolving into harmony, a song of warning and hope that lingers in the air. Why do we fuss over direct meetings when their ideas have already embraced? When the Dalai Lama wrote to Greta in his book, when she spoke of his words in 2021, wasn't that a communion? A bridge built not of stone, but of will. I see them standing on opposite shores of a river, the river of time, of distance, of difference. And yet their voices carry across, blending into a single cry. Wake up, care, live, oh, the ache of it, the beauty and the pain. Greta, alone on that pavement in 2018, a speck against the sprawl of power. Did she know she'd ignite a revolution? Did she feel the weight of millions marching behind her? And the Dalai Lama, gazing out from Dharamsala, his people scattered, his home a memory. Does he ever tire of hoping? I marvel at their strength, their refusal to bend. She, who could have chosen comfort, chose a fight. He, who could have chosen despair, chose grace. What drives them, I ask myself? What fuels a girl to face presidents and a monk to defy empires? Is it love? Duty? A stubborn faith that we're worth saving? The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others, Mahatma Gandhi said. And there it is, their secret, their fire. They've lost themselves in us, in the messy, marvelous tangle of humanity, betting everything on our capacity to change. Let's widen the lens now, shall we? Beyond Greta and the Dalai Lama, beyond 2020 or 2021, to the eternal questions they stir. What is influence after all? Is it a title, a list, a handshake? Or is it something wilder, something that seeps into the cracks of our lives unbidden? Greta's no spiritual leader. She'd scoff at the label, wouldn't she? Yet her words prick our conscience like a prophet's. The Dalai Lama's no activist in the streets, yet his calm reshapes the world as surely as any march. Together, they defy our boxes, our need to categorize and conquer. They teach us that spirit isn't bound by dogma, that purpose isn't chained to proximity. The wound is the place where the light enters you, Rumi wrote. Isn't that what they are? Wounds in our complacency, letting light flood in? I feel it now, the swell of it all, and I want to shout, why aren't we listening? Why do we dither while the earth chokes? Greta and the Dalai Lama. They're not just names, not just figures in a fleeting news cycle. They're echoes of something ancient, something we've buried under concrete and noise. She's the child we all once were, wide-eyed and unafraid, demanding the world keep its promises. He's the elder we long to become, wise and unbroken, holding fast to what's good. Together, they're a bridge between what was and what could be, a bridge we're too scared, too lazy, too lost to cross. Oh, how I ache for us to try, to step out of our smallness, to join their chorus, to live not just for today, but for the tomorrows we'll never touch. So here we stand, March 12th, 2025, looking back at 2020, at 2021, at the arc of their story. The statement, Greta Thunberg, listed with the Dalai Lama as spiritually influential in 2020, though no direct meeting, confirmed, is a half-truth, a spark in the dark. No list binds them, no fleshly meeting seals them. But does that dim their light? Not a bit. Their influence is a river, flowing beyond the banks of fact, washing over us in waves of awe and urgency. They've met in the only place that matters, in the shared dream of a world worth saving. What you seek is seeking you, Rumi said, and perhaps that's the final truth. We seek them, Greta's fire, the Dalai Lama's peace, not because they're perfect, but because they show us who we could be. Tell me then, with your heart wide open, isn't that enough? Isn't it ever?